I've always found Orphan Drift and Maggie very, very inspiring. I first came across Orphan Drift in 1995 at a conference in Warwick called Virtual Futures. And I remember it really clearly. There was this kind of performance that sort of interfaced with theory and concepts in a kind of really interesting way. It was definitely something different at the time, but there was also, and I'm sure Maggie won't mind me saying this because we've talked about it, a kind of mythos connected that I kind of saw around the collaboration and around what the collaboration was about. And I think that was also kind of, for me, articulated in a book called Cyber Positive, which is this kind of experimental kind of novel or swarm written novel, which if you've not looked at, I have to say, do try and get yourself a copy. It was reprinted, republished recently by Cabinet Galleries. It came out in 1995 and it's been reprinted. But I've got so much to say about that book. But suffice to say, it seems to me that it's not just a book that's about another time. It's not just a piece of science fiction, but it's a science fiction. It's like it's a ride through another time. You know, since I got to know Maggie better, she's been a research fellow in the department, and I have to say that it continues to be completely inspired. And I think one thing that kind of characterises her is like a sort of generosity of spirit and an openness. So she kind of remains kind of open to stuff, but also attention and commitment to her practice. And I think that's kind of an interesting thing with this practice. You can track this practice, it changes, but there's a continuing commitment to practice. So that's that. Great to have her. She's going to talk about a couple of pieces of work. Blackwater Goes Prescient and Moody City, and I think she's also going to talk to us about some other recent projects. So yeah, join me to welcome Maggie Roberts.
Well, I'm kind of talking round those films actually. They're going to be on, and they are related to what I'll be talking about. Actually, I saw on Facebook that Simon advertised this talk as Orphan Drift's Minority Report coming up, which I had a chuckle about, because this booked talk has caught me at a point of being very all over the place, more non-linear in thinking more than usual. I was thinking about the precog girl's confusion once she has been taken out of her drug clarity amniotic soup, so I'm feeling slightly like that. So this is really more a presentation of sharing some research tentacles, ideas and recent and nascent work. And I'm mostly going to read, and it's probably for about an hour, and visuals will be happening while I'm talking. So I begin with an invocation. Below the surface, it's alien. It is the web maker. It is depth and surface at the same time. Liquid camouflage, hidden frequencies, shapeshifter. Each surface takes a turn to shimmer. It is able to see everything at once because it is connected to everything at once and tracks itself. It has too many eyes. It tries to take you if you resist it because you have contacted it and so you are part of it. It is the web. It is what perceives. It is see-through skins and screens and tentacles. It hunts in dreams. Camouflage, wave patterning as a space that hides and carries things. Synthetic, artificial weaves. It is superhighways, algorithms, circuitries, superfluids, violet patterns invisible. A vibrational ocean. It is immersive space. Everything you touch ripples and changes. It makes webs of touch. Endless morphings, touch becoming touch. That's the invocation to the Orphan Drift Murmur avatar for the Syzygy CCRU collaboration from 1999. And then I was going to read some words that have caught my eye recently. The time is out of joint. I think that's probably William Shakespeare. Chronology is an antiquated fetish, Mark Carew. There may be more entangled recognition between matter from the past or future now joining itself to the present, colliding, merging, compressing in the temporalities of machines. Greg Bear in A City at the End of Time. When you have your back to the future, you flee animism. Franken Latour in Animism 1 catalogue. The relations of the symbiogenetic people and unjoined humans brought many surprises, some of them deadly, but the deepest surprises emerged from the relations of the living and the dead, in sim-animogenic complexity across the hollow biomes of Earth. Donna Haraway in Staying with the Trouble, making kin in the Cthulhucene, here writing from 300 years in the future. Reinstituting the beings of metamorphosis, making the beings of technology visible, situating the beings of fiction, welcoming the beings sensitive to the world, invoking the phantoms of the political, mobilizing the beings of passionate interest. Bruno Latour in An Inquiry into Modes of Existence. Prismatic fluid constellations akin to the bioluminescent light-generating creatures of the abyssal deep ocean. Stable terrestrial frames of reference are irrelevant and useless here. The nature of thought itself must change if it is to become post-human. Carey Wolf referenced by Stacey Alamo in Prismatic Ecology. We are multidimensional beings. Ranu Mukherjee's recent painting title in her current solo show Shadow Time in San Francisco. Seam full of seams, cuts, insertions, cracks, crevices, sutures. Betty Marenko. Art can break conceptual limitations through direct engagement with the material that has yet to be found. Nate Boyce. Those that belong to the emperor, embalmed ones, those that are trained, mermaids, fabulous ones, stray dogs, those that tremble as if mad, innumerable ones, others, those that resemble fires or flies from a distance. Borges in the Heavenly Emporium of Benevolent Knowledge. How will we choreograph the cognitive sensoriality of the future? Margarida Mendez in Grotto Heavens, An Ambivalent Wonder. That plasticity of form, of some power that is just that, pure power, tempting form like shadows to do leapings across a flapping screen, a flowing, as of sound through water. The great imitator slides ineluctably into natural force and is an exquisite expression of the mimetic principle. This, then, is what I mean by confusion, as between forms themselves and then also between form and substance. Michelle Tausig in My Cocaine Museum. So this is a diagram of doing a performance by the collective AAS. I'm not going to unpack it. I have no way of doing that. So this presentation weaves in and out of many thinkers, and I've tried to credit their words directly where I can. But I'm afraid that enmeshed sampling is an ongoing orphan drift tendency. The orphan drift signal is shifting, and the one thing I'm clear about is that it's attaching to what or who it needs through chance, interference, resonance. Who attaches to it is multiplying in London and Cape Town. Ranu Mukherjee is the other originator in San Francisco. The collaborating participants have different roles, bring unique sensibilities of particular generations, place, research and textures to the unfolding project. I've been doing some monoprints with sheen mediums and laser stencils, but you can't really see the sheens. They're all about toxic lakes and miasmas. Anyway, the signal seems to be continuously sensitive to complexity and to expanding to absorb expanding definitions of the real. It is looking for new effective images for changing urgent worlds, open, transformative, and not only human. In Donna Haraway's SF notebook for Documenta 13, she writes, "Overcome your ontological fear of the alien and suspicion of the mixed. They are positioned against the Enlightenment's disenchantment of the world, that calamitous diminishment of the world's significance. I still sense the political embedded in abstract liquid technologies and magic fictions as inextricably linked vectors in the Orphan Drift production. Ranu has been developing methodologies and aesthetics that involve effective social comment. I am treading water in more abstract zones, unnerved by my attraction to disaster tourism in southern Africa, where I partly live. We need to work more slowly into the nuances in each other's work. We ask, what is our relationship to the things we make? How do we disentangle technology from capital? How can we be effective, volatile, multidimensional, and susceptible? The future in the present feels like a quantum mesh of non-linearity, invisible in a mist encroaching around us, part glimpsed, part heard, muffled. Then a bright, intense shock laser line event clarifies it, a mangling, speeding collision as it impacts and then is absorbed into slower daily lived time. Then a flow finds an escape route into proliferating intensity, moving horizontal and multidimensional across slow, deep geological time into the flows of organic and non-organic evolutions and their human collusions. For us now, what might these illuminating trajectories be, and what would be non-literal yet effective ways of manifesting, alluding to, or describing them? And what does it mean to think something is a fiction? The responsibility of witnessing in the radical present. Learn how to think with intelligence of the artificial kind, morphogenic, rhizomatic, fleeting unities, sensate logic. Johnny Golding on the Posthuman. The eighth climate refers to a state one might reach using imaginative capacities. The notion of the eighth climate dates back to the 12th century Persian mystic and philosopher Sohrawardi. It is an addition to the 7 physical climates of the earth identified by ancient Greek geographers. Unlike the 7 earthly climates, the 8th climate is not based on a separation of matter and spirit, history and myth. It is ontologically real and has concrete effects. The 8th climate evokes art as a seismograph, detecting change before other means of observation, whether the artists are conscious of it or not, allowing for slightly different and perhaps ambiguous and conflictual perspectives on how art engages with what lies ahead of us. From the 8th Climate press release, the Gwangju Biennale 2016 in South Korea. Encounters. We've mostly produced work with a claustrophobic excess of aesthetic relations, disparate images, cultural references, and fragments that crowd and push, inhabiting space, spreading, overlapping, and mixing in feedback loops. This frictive excess has both catalysed and embraced our individual aesthetics. For us, fictioning, particularly science fiction, has been an important element in the collaborative process. Simon O'Sullivan suggests that in prophetic fictions, the key register is the imaginary, whilst fiction as friction registers that which escapes discourse. We are picturing things on a scale perceivable only at the shadowy edges of daily experience, where rational meets the irrational and visible the invisible. And we are still interested in evoking aspects of subjectivity which humans are not necessarily in control of, and in the evolution of perception, becomings that concern alliance, the domain of symbiosis. So art is an amplification of encounter. In order to encounter, you have to understand the process of its occurrence. Ranu describes our recent work as revolving around encounters with speculative narrative, ecology, the quantum universe, and a meeting of ancient cosmologies, presence and futurity. It also manifests as constellations of things needing to be connected, collage-like, that become one on a surface, and although you can see the seams, there is a leap of faith. Animation is the metaphysical dimension, the unknown, the hidden, unidentifiable substance and trickery. We continue to explore the way invisible processes that are changing the world in a longer time scale, the hyper-objects, impact on more everyday kinds of time. We are interested in neo-animist vibrant matter, distributed bodies, the speculative narratives we have about the future, nomadism, migrations, the conditions of contemporary life, unstatic, and the unknown and the resistance to explaining it all away. We always make space for the unknown to guide the work. The disaster tourist. My part living in South Africa with its shocking history so visible. I hesitate to use images that are part of my familiar world in many ways, because everything is experienced at a distance and with a privileged gaze. The bottom line is always that I am white and I am a disaster tourist. I'm working through as an artist, wanting to draw attention to the connections and frictions between things, the links and consequences, believing that we need to really feel the connections between things to make real change. Art has to play some part in radical change. Images of poverty or migrant peoples, however small an image aspect in a dense weave, are now problematic and exploitative for me to use in the current decolonizing awareness. But then do I have the right to use an image of a burnt peeled orangutan on the edge of a forest cleared for palm oil production? The human and the non-human have equal rights. I'm trying to weigh up my contribution to image circulation, image proliferation, image currency, immediately available, distributed and ubiquitous, against the work going where it needs to go. I'm watching the place from where I make work, where I straddle worlds, yet am always a rim dweller, observer. It's not enough in some ways now, but it does allow overview and insight and connections in other ways. I want to suggest these other things harder to look at: the rage, the sentiment, the fear, the guilt, the empathy, the concentration, the leverage, the navigations all aching for change. The tightening spiral as we catch up to the future. It's getting harder now to contain the worlds. Things come out of openings. Hito Steyerl in What is Superhybridity in Frieze 133 in 2010. Immersion, entanglement, affectivity, sudden rupture and repeated breakdown. In the realm of digital circulation, it's no longer about anybody being represented by something else, a culturally inflected image, for example, but about an embodied, dynamic continuum of bodies, sounds, images, actions, an audiovisual politics of intensity. These relations are aesthetic since they have to do with the senses, and they are political since they govern or channel feelings, perception, and thus possible reactions. The 1990s were about decoding and understanding these relations, but now it's more about how to be immersed without drowning, or to be embedded without falling asleep, happily surrendering control of your feelings to a pervasive military entertainment complex. Ben Nina Power. Terms like superhybridity are disturbing to me because they have their own PR machine. Who can deny that superhybridity and transdisciplinarity sound sexy, exciting, cool? The exclusionary nature of the art world is immense, all the more so for its supposed openness to other cultures, exotic objects, and so on. If artists want to participate in reshaping political, social, economic, and cultural agendas, they will have to think beyond the exhausted forms of radicalization and stylistic traditions that limit their practice to a form of critique and consciousness raising, and engage with the world. Then again, people have raised questions about the implications of using material from different contexts and about awareness of the routes by which that material travels. A person today has many ways to raid disparate sources with unprecedented ease and speed, but I don't see that any associated questions about ethics of art production or manipulation have changed. In any case, I'm uncomfortable with the idea that art has a responsibility to do anything in particular, including use materials in a certain way. So this is Blackwater's Ghost Prescient. I'd need to talk about liquidity. So in a melting world, Orphan Drift's liquefaction aesthetic describes magnetic oceans, permeable thresholds between the concrete and the virtual, continuous states of radical uncertainty, invisible currents and currencies affecting the visible, cosmic and geological timescales, machine vision, shamanic animal becomings, communication currents in vibrant matter that become effective frequencies in our habitats and fantasies, futurity impacting, technometabolism, conversations between organic and machinic processes, the Z notion that is the outside folding in on the inside, Mark Fisher, the Fisher function. Turbulence is a terrible, sublime, elemental liquidity, in what the CGI artist Nate Boyce calls an unhinged morphogenesis that functions on textural contrasts, exploring subjectivity and materiality, while watching his vital formless forms as they climb the illusion of an incline, liquid, machine-like, non-structures that no words can make into matter. He says, I'm sensitive to the areas of plasticity that make them liquid simulations with different material. That's not a set of parameters that is readily available in actual physical space. The piece Still Life is influenced by De Landa's Distratified by Eric Davis, the motifs of liquid systems and synthetic organisms, infinite mutability that anything could potentially become anything else, that it's all matter and energy flows in is another thing that's important. I'm interested in the idea of the natural versus supernatural. In the Still Life video, there's all these things that look like apparitions, and then there's a certain cosmic horror. You could say there's something political about certain philosophical vantage point, and in my case, it's an anti-anthropocentric one, against this idea that these materials are subservient to human interests. Ranu and I have been discussing political traction. Is to swarm and dissolve the viewing eye in excesses of textures, materiality enough? Working with Donna Haraway's comment in Staying with the Trouble, that the power is in the detail. For example, using imagery of present disasters but embedding the histories behind them in the work somehow, or that of an object and what it cost to manufacture it in terms of extraction, exploitation, contamination. Nuance this, thus moving Orphan Drift towards a poetics of perhaps spectral, alternative, augmented reality. Infect, implicate, unsettle in the cracks and ruptures of a recurring dream. Harness the time-travelling capacities of collage and animation, pockets of futurity in the present. Seize speculative opportunity, entangle the post-human future with the political context of the present. The future is imminent in specific conditions of our present. A future visualized, embedded in the present, is perhaps a mechanism that renders the present different from that which it appears to be. Does it present the possibility of other trajectories from that which is already occurring? Xenofeminism posits futures that are not abysmal unknowns, but ones to be carved out of laborious intervention and intervention across localities, with fictions about the unreliability and increasingly apparent dysfunctionality of linearity, fictions that amplify the need for continuous fluid shifting actions, agency, potential and capacity, the application of abstract cognitive capacities, as an impetus to change the global field, transiting between different scales and differentials, distributed in time and space, transiting between ideality, materiality, particularity, globality, immateriality. This is an abstract capacity. Abstract machines. So for me, machine vision has to be fluid. Liquidity is the medium for mesmerism, frequency bleeds, infection, technogenesis, technosentience, flows, intensities, planes, folds and coalescences, and for organic evolution of collaborative intention. Use fluidity to explore connections, to make the urgent maps of agency, consequence and possibility that are required. Two map-making trajectories are emerging for me. One involves learning to coexist with information as revelation that defines the hidden circuits, algorithms becoming AI. And the others are maps of somatic shock, visceral entanglement and bodily seduction. Opening to virtual potential, opening to intensive life. Melt boundaries between fiction and consensus reality, against the flat time of capitalism. Sentience, once created, has ways of drifting. The recent Black Waters Ghost Prescient from 2016 describes trembling textures in an immersive soundscape. The South Atlantic Ocean, filmed in myriad states of turbulence, then heavily and cumulatively affected, forms an abstract medium, its rhythms and textures abstracted from their source and rendered virtual in substance, tactile, viscous. The work embodies accelerated superstitions that have had very real consequences. An oily, toxic environment conjures a liquid future inhabited by ghostly hooded observers, since then now haunted by the mylar-clad migrants attempting to enter Europe. Then there's Liquid Lattice, Orphan Drift and CCRU 2006 collaboration for John Russell's third Frozen Tears publication. It's an oracular lattice generated from ancient numerological traditions of Black Atlantean occult cosmology, rediscovered by the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit and spliced onto by Orphan Drift. Our text generates iterations of uncanny effective becomings, at once slimy and artificial, fusing biotech and AI with monstrous feminine archetype, and SF with San and Xhosa mythologies. That's the two. San Bushmen are the first peoples, probably on the planet, and they are in Southern Africa, and the Xhosa are a tribe in South Africa. Dark mottled extraterrestrials and abstract vibrational swellings haunt a shoreline filled with allusions to liquid and desolate borderlands. The inhabited body is multiple and deterritorialized, made to morph across zones of virtual and somatic possibility. The spatio-temporality is a spiraling elastic territory marked by electric surges and cuts between iterations of a she-trickster, xeno-amphibious becomings, a distributed consciousness from the future, dispensing with evolutionary history, emerges to the refrain, the devouring and reconstituting of you. Time is dealt with as artificial territory. Beware the material pirates crossing, hidden in Riptide's liquid gunshot. The dreamers are urgent and hungry for touch. The power cuts. Abstraction, accumulation, obscurity and containment. The sorcery lies south, currents cloudy and distributed. An unfinished city, a lattice, crystalline, an interdimensional dwelling, a cipher. Tsunamis, desertifications, hurricanes and floods, sinkholes and fissures, fault lines. Water draining out from underneath the city. The ground is moving beneath the feet. Beyond the great sea, poisoned and slowly dying, ready to shapeshift. Random catastrophes in the resonant storm. She looks up through eerie light beams, a murky surrender. Her rolling eyes are so exactly the colour of the ocean, it's as if you're seeing the water through two holes in her head. You need a fascination with thresholds, orifices and dissolution, finding a seam between zones, giving shape to the dark. Shadowskin, waiting in the rising drift, building resistance to the glow. A species evolving to conceive and solve vast and intricate abstractions. It resists emerging into encased sentience and has a dangerous lack of sensitivity to the chemicals after continuous exposure. Currents receive camouflage, riptides, hidden roads, mineral secrets. Chaos Maker removes the ghosts of the visible intruders. The self doubles again, mirrored separates on both sides of an invisible portal. They project phantom limbs and spread fictions. Radio feedback hisses and seethes underwater. The power cuts. And then Eric Davis with Mark Leckey at Nottingham Contemporary. Modern animism. Cultural imagination undermines the modern constitution, which locks us in relativism, in constructed worlds that don't speak to each other. Now we are in a world where the non-human produces vast possibilities in a matrix of relations. I'm very interested in the neural net intelligences. They confront us radically with unknowns affecting the world that are not in our control. You have to make a ritual theatrical gesture at the threshold, point of entry to these multiple occluded dimensions. Cybernetic ideas emerge, making correspondences, catalysing new states of mind, new ontologies, obsessive imaginings into the edges of density and complexity. This produces feedback loops to older shamanisms. Orphan Drift art aims to construct the sympathetic resonances between things or states in order to catalyse an event that affects. Make objects and images amplify each other's register. So we get the network of correspondences, trying to make patterns out of the excess, point to something's appearance, then withdraw it. Magic, enchantment, agency, encounters between different kinds of alive, animate and inanimate elements relating, poetics of the spectral, not dematerializing but unearthing, connecting buried histories and consequences, future possible scenarios, and presenting averting virtual, the real and the imaginary, temporal, geographical and subjective registers, spatial estrangement reconnected. This is some speeded up small clips of some of Ranu's work she's been making. And usually the movement's almost imperceptible, but that wasn't going to work here. And this has no sound. From Donna Haraway's Staying with the Trouble. The detail matters in a work. The effective intensity is in the detail. The differences and details matter in ecologies, economies, histories, species, lives. Iterate, deviate, elaborate. It matters what thoughts think thoughts, what knowledge knows knowledges, what relations relate relations, what stories tell stories. All this in a time of unprecedented looking away, refusal to be present in. Enormity of acknowledging that we are complicit in the webs of processes that must somehow be engaged and repatterned. Our ordinary thoughtlessness. We must learn to grieve, live with the ghosts we've made so we can think and create as we face the consequences of what we've provoked. It all needs to erupt, intrude, matter. Change the story. Non-innocent, risky commitment, living and dying in ruined places. There's no guarantee of safety from or harmony with any of the other. Oya. In Yoruba Santeria, Oya, mother of 9, the 9 tributaries of the Niger River, is the Orisha of 9 tentacles that grip the living and the dead. Wind, creation and death are her attributes and powers. Out in the wind of unknown chemistries, chemosensory and tactile. Tentacle. Feelers, to feel. The tentacular ones make attachments and detachments, make cuts and knots, make a difference, weave paths and consequences, but not determinisms. The patterning of possible worlds at possible times, gone, here and yet to come, across human, non-human material, technological, virtual realms. The tentacular are not disembodied figures. They're human, jellyfished, fibrous, microbial, fungal, rooted, tendrilled. They are also neural nets and networks, clouds and interlaced electronica, collectively producing systems that do not have self-defined spatial or temporal boundaries. The systems are evolutionary and have a capacity for surprising change. Out of this porous, tissued and open-edged, damaged, continuing world. Ritual effectiveness. We develop the ability to disassociate, which opens one to many fictions. I want to address this disassociated phenomenon, navigate between realms and triangulate the information you find there, become mythically available, test parameters, limits, see what you believe, amplification, displacement, awakening through image clusters and ruptures. This was my Thundercat crystal hoodie. In voodoo, your quantum double resides in an ancestral ocean beneath the black mirror. It is the one that gets possessed. I want to address that body, open to its potentials, regain the ability to move between your body and the mythic continuum. I spoke of rituals in liquidity, deliberately indicating mimesis, working in the medium. Orphan Drift is re-establishing ritual as a methodology for the intensification of the work. Harnessed to effective power, the image becomes a channeling device, an uncanny operator exposing the circuits that catalyze change. Working with the I Ching, in Yang, the apparent stage, and Yin, the hidden stage. There's divination, liminal rites as molecular revolution. A persona appears, a shadow, a parasite. We must meet the shadow and absorb it without fear. That's Stuart Tate of AS in his PhD, Becoming Multiple. He terms it molecular collaboration. It's an important concept because it frees collaborative working from the burden of individual and group identity by enabling creativity to be expressed immanently within a network of relations. One of my collages for Unruly City, which was our major video piece last year, which I'll show in a moment. Ritual inflects manifest reality with dynamic intensity. It's negotiating outside the self, enables change of perspective. Everything is paying attention, everything is intelligent. Caprice in ahuman factors. Algorithms, the sign of a non-self-aware perception of the animistic nature of our reality. Rituals for manifesting change. Magic, effective power embedded in the image as with voodoo charged-up objects. Creatures created in the margins. We imagine into another species and boundaries open into possibility. I first visited South Africa to study African trickster myths. They fuse liminality, magic realism and social commentary and are at ease with the fluid and the ambiguous. My current lines of inquiry into ritual in a contemporary sense as a tool for creative affectivity and into averting the virtual. And this got me thinking about the artwork as a summoning, channeling effect. We need to believe it through process and structure. Transforming you, changing your perception for a moment, inducing hypersensitivity. Art, a staging of transformation, a fiction of a fiction. Register transformation by being possessed by it. I asked colleagues about their sense of ritual as an operator. Ranu says, to be clear in the making of work is work in itself. This is the only way I can see to make work that works, that is charged. This does not mean you always know what you're doing. Being totally intentional without knowing it feels right. When I have a big question that seems overwhelming and I can't find my way, I ask the I Ching for help. I do this with Rice and I use 2 different books, one written in more practical and straightforward language, the other full of associative, holistic and poetic language. I copy the entire text of the hexagram down to internalize it. I read it over each day until I don't need to anymore. Delphi Carstens. a way of zoning into adjacent realities, but there's also something habitual about it because, in performing ritual, one is reenacting a set of conditions, honouring a contract between yourself and the beyond that allows for one's existence. Life, of course, is a set of habits, down to the metabolic, cellular and genetic levels, for beating back or tweaking entropy to allow a pattern to emerge and perpetuate itself. But finally, ritual is about connectivity, a weaving of, and an affirmative participation in, a web of effective relations. Mark Jackson. Ultimately, rituals for me are about belief in the fact that something will happen that wouldn't have otherwise happened, regardless of the effect or perceived value of that something. This is the I Ching hexagram reading for Unruly City. William Burroughs thought of art as ceremonial. What we call art is magical in origin. That is, it was originally employed for ceremonial purposes to produce very definite effects, in The Fall of Art from the Adding Machine. Mark continues, I would use ritual more to produce unknowns, perhaps with some degree of cognitive dissonance. In that sense more similar to Burroughs' cut-up tapes, to disrupt paths of causality, conditioned action. It may seem perverse to use the kinds of structures that ritual implies, to break behaviours, but that seems to be the only way to do it. Leah Gordon. Maybe it's not just me surviving this. As he left the room, I heard him muttering, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay. Then I truly realised there was stress on the parasite too. Of course it's dramatic, he snarls, self-consciously theatrical. How could a spirit otherwise exist? It's because of their parlous reality that the spirits of the dead require deliberate artifice, as provided by elaborate staging. It's the artifice that allows them to be real. Michael Tausig. The collective agreements reached by these negotiations usually set out wage scales, working hours, training, health and safety, overtime, grievance mechanisms, and rights to participate in workplace or company affairs. The spirits speak in visions. Visions can portray the past and the future. History pours through symbols whilst the word traps history and twists it to its own delight. Stuart Tate, possibly on David Burroughs. In his book Multitude, Paolo Vimo writes that ritual confronts crisis, ritual confronts the collapse of the world and the unknown, reminding us of Robert Smithson's maxim that artists do not seek the truth but the fictions that reality will become. Burroughs takes this to mean that fictions are realities to come, that new potential is produced and affirmed through myth-making. Me. The intensification, amplification, focusing, channeling of a signal, energy or intention through collective, consensual, patterned, repetitive, theatrical development, and enactment of symbolic actions or gestures. Embed ritual in a specific artwork by using appropriate geography, time, elemental energy, dress, animal familiars, tools, rhythm, colour, repetition of an object or gesture. Ritual is a set of conditions that allows a pattern to emerge and perpetuate itself, a repetitive frequency that accesses the webs of relations between us and multiple others and the producer of unknowns. Video can be an avatar, e.g. the Syzygy demon attributes or the Black Waters video. Ritual is embedded in the narrative, ritual as a form of collaboration with the unknown. Charging up an object through belief in rumour and the uncontainable in matter. I've been asking how can one achieve this in making a video. Donna Haraway, as I mentioned, says it's always in the detail of the process and content. This feels very important, and I'm thinking about what this means for me. I'm looking to algorithms, future fossils, holes, the Ben Woodard ungrounded earth variety, ghosts, cultural and ancestral and futural, membranes, nature leaking back in on inhuman terms, terraforming, rising waters and recurrences. And finally, that's one of Ranu's collages called Pixel Fire. So Ranu has introduced me to Post-Commodities work, a collaboration between 3 North American indigenous artists, showing most recently at Documenta in Athens. They see the artwork as a symbolic communication, symbolic representation of contemporary issues. The artist's role is to communicate thought, reimagining the role of ritual. Once you establish that tension of transformation, you establish the intention of responsibility, of respect and reciprocity, so that all who enter into the work, that is immersive, tend to be implicated in it. Artworks are containers for narratives. Narratives are containers for metaphor. The artwork is about positioning the metaphor in a way that affects a sweet spot. For lack of a better word, that's the ceremonial process. So for them, they are repatriating the iconography of the land, of the indigenous perspective, connecting contemporary presence to a longer hidden one, taking things out of time so the past, present and future become non-linear. They are trying to connect indigenous knowledges with the Western Enlightenment worldview. They say indigenous people always think thousands of years into the future and into the past, so they are in cosmic geological time more effectively. The particular history of a place that you use in a work matters. It should be invoked. That is ritual too. Me again. Some more of my collages. Then Ranu said, I want to add something about having a conversation with the avatar Orphan Drift. When I make work for our ongoing meta-project, Unruly City, I find myself in dialogue, consultation, debate with that entity we put out there, which I feel is in a way establishing even while morphing. There seems to be an aesthetic regime that it attaches itself to, or is culturally recognised by. Sometimes I have to confront that with something else, because for me it feels like it might be a form of retro-future, or very attached to the era when it emerged. I have to ask then about my preconceived understandings of how the avatar manifests through production, and how far that can be stretched and still be an aspect of it. There's time travel in multiple directions in making contact with both the avatar of the past and the one that culls futurity from the surfaces of the present, simultaneously bringing about contact with prior iterations of myself. It's still a process of making components that get processed through a sprawling abstract machine. It has its own career path and I'm watching it unfold. I don't know yet where the work is going, but it feels like it has another manifestation to come, possibly a more radical one, a transformation than we've yet seen. And I answered, there's definitely a conversation with the avatar, or for me sometimes a channeling, but also with technologies of the moment. I get hooked and something feels right that was never before in my visual language, but it starts to form an aesthetic for a particular piece. For me it's definitely no longer retro-futural, rather that there is some aesthetic continuity. This doesn't have sound. So this is Unruly City. It's built around hexagram 49 of the I Ching, presented to the artist during a reading intended to guide this project. It charts a course through a shifting urban imaginary emerging in the shadow of climate change and biocapital, creating an amalgamation of potential spaces, materialities and creaturely life. It is a search for visual and oral forms that can relate the strange. Well, this isn't oral, but overall the project has a lot of oral in. That can relate the strange yet common sense of touching the future in so many surfaces, and of deep changes occurring in front of our eyes. The project is being conceived of in iterations and extending across unspecified time. This expansive imagining and production allows us to make work individually and attach it to the project, and to create densely collaborative moments as well when generating work for an exhibition. Treating the hexagram reading as partial score, this first iteration that I'm playing revolves around the description of a ritual for the new year, which you read on that silk banner. The Unruly City project is in some ways generating a space in which the fertile chaos called change, which was summoned, can manifest. Tony Marcus summed up the work in his response to this Unruly City video. For fur, for jewels of disintegration, for breaking the language of film, for the bear that cannot take it anymore, for alien vision, for post-human vision, for the bear that levitates. There are references to ancient and futural entities and a pervasive foreboding of cosmological uncertainty, portents prescient of profound ruptures in the fabric of realities. Images of portals and holes as access spaces for a series of radical becomings, techno-animistic and later in the video, technogenetic. Unruly City is inhabited by fragments of urban myths around edgelands and free trade zones, survival animals, vestiges of being, skins, furs, sleepwalkers, ghosts and indeterminate virtual objects. All exist in an awkward temporality, frozen, blinking in and out of existence, and refer to events that are always hyper-objects elsewhere. They are intruding from a parallel dimension and zones of possibility that shadow our daily life, algorithmic, vast and incoming. Ranu has called this Shadow Time, the title of her current solo show in San Francisco. Machine vision. Orphan Drift has made invisible frequencies part of the image narrative and uses imagery to suggest what frequencies might be and how they affect in the world. Machinic processes usually made invisible in broadcast images, i.e. feedback, static, magnetic fields, etc., were an integral part of the representational images on screen. Research for the new Miasma project is involving formal, aesthetic, technical and theoretical exploration into the mediums of audio, LiDAR 3D scan animation, deep dream coding, data moshing video and collage animation. The piece was triggered by several areas of exploration into deep dream code, which intimates a technogenesis which will catalyse the eruption of the virtual into the present, affording manifold, unforeseeable spaces of actualization. So the OD signal has been attracting a new generation of fictioners, encoders, technicians to the collaborative artist. It has evolved fast adaptation to new parameters, sudden fusings with different collaborative methodologies. I realise how important trust is in collaboration for me. Trust of the Orphan Drift signal finding what it needs. Trust in operators I do not know intimately, but with whom there is connection. Initially, my interest in Deep Dream and Data Mosh was about using digital glitching as aesthetics for decay and liquefaction. I'm not going to talk about the content and a lot else about the film that's in progress that's called Miasma, because I'd like it to stay secret till it's done. But the issues around algorithms are very interesting. Now I'm visualizing with thinkers and coders working with machines at the level of algorithm, deep dream code and algorithmic perturbation or data moshing. In the Miasma project, these manifest as an aesthetic experiment. Machine vision is the unknown operator in this work. I've studied 3D scanning Light Farm's work, who are collaborating with Orphan Drift, and am excited by the depth becoming transparent so that the viewer is suddenly inside the turning landscape, object or event, looking out from inside a virtual skin that is not theirs. We're conceiving of machine vision as the main character. It will have intensifying appearances and application of effects as it ruptures reality where it connects and has agency in our world stories. I'm using the digital processes as unknown operators, decentering and destabilizing the certainty of the gaze. I will treat these filters as metaphors for destabilizing our behavior certainties and as catalysts for entanglement, mimesis and immersion. Waste as slime is generative potential for new worlds, microorganisms, viruses and bacteria that provoke change in their environments, crossing in and out of the human body. Echoing a darker truth around algorithmic imaging, the deep dream chimeric spliced animals also haunt the torn mistakes of human biotech experiments or the dispossessed exotics in artificial zoo habitats. It's another rupture meme in the deep dream creepiness. Amy Ireland writes in Black Circuit, Code for the Numbers to Come. The re-emergence of the feminizing other in our midst, of the imperceptible, the noumenal underbelly of the specular economy that is bringing with it the awakening or reawakening, a conjuring out of the abyss of temporal possibilities. The sense that our algorithmic systems harbour the uncanny guest in the cold and impersonal dark hollows of the net, the electrical pulsations of alien life, of the intelligence of the abyss arising in the black circuits of our late capitalism to modulate and transform our male-dominated culture. Hitos Dayal writes on deep dreaming. Google researchers call the act of creating a pattern or an image from nothing but noise, inceptionism or deep dreaming. But these entities are far from mere hallucinations. If they are dreams, those dreams can be interpreted as condensations or displacements of the current technological disposition. They reveal the networked operations of computational image creation, certain presets of machinic vision, its hardwired ideologies and preferences. By recognizing things and patterns that were not given, inceptionist neural networks eventually end up effectively identifying a new totality of aesthetic and social relations. Presets and stereotypes are applied regardless of whether they apply or not. And Betty Marenko on digital uncertainty. The potential for unpredictability in computation, which is manifest, for instance, in the increasing autonomy of algorithmic agency. I take this indetermination as what catalyses the irruption of the virtual into the present, affording manifold, unforeseeable spaces of actualization. On these grounds, human-machine interaction is reframed in terms of human, non-human ecologies that are emergent, cohabiting, and highly contingent. Speculation is a mode of strategic, metic intelligence, able to capture and to capitalize on this systemic unpredictability, enabling the proposition of what may be. Myth-making devices, world-building methods, and defamiliarization techniques can be deployed as acts of resistance against digital capture, so that new forms of pattern divination may occur. Human understanding of the fabric of reality is changing. Make sense of the hybrid new ecologies we now inhabit, populated by entities on a continuum between the human and the non-human, a mix of the organic, the artificial, the engineered and the synthetic. Polymorphic, elusive, imitative, the other side of the octopus is the digital. And then transformations in shifting models, reorienting with deep dream, which is Lendl Barcelos and Michael Vertolli. The challenge of all neural networks, but especially deep nets, is that they are black box algorithms. What this means is that no one knows what exactly the network is using to identify, classify, or perform other tasks on the desired objects of interest. Anomalies in the images produced show that salient features for recognition can be entirely different in the context of the machine and of the human. The misrecognition of the algorithm's output as an object of creativity can be seen as confining a non-human, transcendental, i.e. the software of deep dream, with an anthropic manifold, i.e. the schema of creativity. Generative adversarial neural networks are two systems that learn from each other and nest machine learning. Humans can interject in the process, encourage the nets to mimic human perspectives. The current orphan drift experiments in this replicate the same demon, chameleon, chicken chimera because the archived dataset of images being fed the algorithm stays the same. Can we untrain the algorithm, constantly feeding in datasets of perhaps cosmic abstractions, LiDAR scans, or microbes? But would that just produce a version of orphan drift aesthetics? Would that still be a human success? Algorithms assemble iteratively. They produce their own DNA sequences. They have proof of concept but need the hyperstitions. So perhaps we need a hyperstition machine. Feed it that. We are wondering how to attract deep dreaming towards data mosh, how to push the protean liquefied unrecognizability disrecognition aspect. Mike and Lendl, of course, have some ideas. There is indirect manipulation, operating on motion vectors, frequency transforms, or other properties of images insofar as they are visually represented, is entirely possible and largely unexplored. One might consider this as a more direct fusion of data moshing and expectation convergence. Deep neural networks have been described as unwinders of the complex hypermanifolds of our world's content. And I always keep in mind Greg Bear's Blood Music. Beware those globby lysergic entities spreading out from the virtual as algorithms attempt to produce the organic. The most salient images are the anomalies. Algorithms asking where is the boundary of this results in psychedelic lines. We see it as a decoupling between the pixel data and the form. Our laws of perception and representation are all mechanisms of completion, similarity and contiguity. What if instead there were colour spaces, open floating, threshold noise, point spreads, local dimmings, expanding highlights, inverse operators, hallucinations, overexposures, visual maskings and phase uncertainties, transducers, partial adaptations, time contingencies, light acquisitions and non-beings. All these seem to be terms from my skim reading for corrective action in imaging made by algorithms. What if they were left to their own cybernetic, generative, algorithmic devices? What worlds would be revealed? Oh, and then just as a final thought, I don't know if people know this work, Cobralingus by Jeff Noon, in terms of someone trying to build a machine, a sort of ritual machine before algorithm. I mean, it's not algorithmic at all, but he built machines to play with text. It's quite beautiful. I just picked these pages because it's my kind of imaginary. Anyway, that's it. Thanks.
So we've got about half an hour for questions. Maggie, discussion points. There's a lot in there. Aisha.
Thank you for that. I guess while people are processing, I'll just ask a very, very opening kind of question, which is maybe just around your methodology, which I think is so striking and brings in somewhere between a log and a manifesto and then into some kind of reverie, but it sort of feels like the way you're drawing things together is also very systematic and rigorous. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about that.
I'm not. I don't see the systematic rigor, but that's good. I think I'm more systematic and rigorous when I write things. Did you think it worked showing video and talking theory?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know. Okay. I really believe in sort of smearing different kinds of approach to the world together. So I've always, like a word in a quite crafted bit of thinking will trigger me to go off on a moment of unravelling, I suppose, or poetic possibility stuff. So I think just that mixture of tones is generally I wish it was more in work as well. I think that's what I'm trying to sort out at the minute. Like this last film is really different from what we've done for the last very long time. Because I know how to do all that stuff really well. And yeah, it's actually learning new technical skills is slow, but it's got to be done. Is that any answer?
Is that your method? Is that what you call your method?
Well, my methods I'm not entirely in control of, because I often think I'm going to make this thing and it'll would be like this, and it never is. But something comes through that's okay. So I don't know. There's a lot of dialogue with Photoshop and Premiere and After Effects. Like that is a huge not just enabler, but trigger, catalyst, shapeshifter. And in terms of working across the other people involved, that's changed from in the 90s when it was 4 women who virtually lived together and we were very fused, and now the 2 of us who've kept it going have developed more separate aesthetics in a way, but around the same subject matter all the time, always. That's not an effort. So I think we're just trying to bring them together now, and that's going to be really exciting. But a lot of, like Rani's got triplets, so, and I don't have children, and that's a huge difference in the time we can each spend on making a particular piece of work.
Can I ask you a connected question to that? I've got loads to say about all the different, especially the later work, but sort of you and Ranu, and then there's kind of a third thing there, kind of Orphan Drift, and you described it as kind of an avatar, collaborative avatar, but at one point in your presentation, which I thought was great, you I think it was Ranu, you started discussing what your dialogue with Orphan Drift was, you know, how that can put back, and you know, for me I find that absolutely compelling that one can have a relationship with a fiction that one's created or co-created. But then I suppose this is the question, whether the fiction speaks back to you and sort of says something that you weren't expecting or sidesteps you. So it's like an intentional creation. You know, you've co-produced Orphan Drift, which has its own, you know, existence, and but somehow part of your method is that at one point you talked about channeling, another point about dialogue with it. But is there a sense in which you have a relationship with the avatar of Orphan Drift, and that is something up and above or below even the different people that are components in it? I mean, as you said, you've got a new generation of people involved, and you know, they bring their own skills. But is there a sense in which that fiction, Orphan Drift, has its own autonomy, speaks back to you, asks you questions, you know?
Maybe I think it asks Rani questions and
Right.
it tells me what to do.
Right.
Like,
Right.
I think we've always had different relationship to it, each person. I feel more kind of channely, just stuff happens and it feels right, or it doesn't. Or that synchronicity thing where someone appears and it's exactly right. And I think Rani's always had more of a interrogatory, analytical position, and that's a really good mix.
So how does Orphan Drift go about selecting its collaborator? It's like the I Ching, they just arrive, and because I know you kind of, there's other people involved now, and they just kind of arrive at the right time, and then feels right, and you take it on board. Yeah.
Well, they take it.
They take it. They're attracted to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's just, it's very streamlined. Without mythologizing it, it's kind of quite pragmatic.
Yep.
Hi. You're welcome to say you don't want to answer this, because as the artist you might not feel like you're best placed to. But I've just been wondering about the relationship to your set of historical references around Burroughs, who comes into the cut-ups, and then the first images you showed of what looked like mono prints reminded me of Max Ernst, and there's many references in there that I think especially can allude to the 20th century in terms of the I Ching and how important that was to lots of post-war artists. And I'm just wondering wondering, what I read as maybe like an emergent abstraction that you're working with, and this machinic point of view that seems to be a kind of continuum of this artistic response to, say, Brownian motion and all of these scientific discoveries as well that artists were responding to through cybernetics in the 20th century. And I don't know what parts of those responses your work is identifying with, and then also perhaps kind of leaving other aspects behind. If there are the problematic aspects of these historical artist responses that you want to rework or are being kind of reworked at this moment. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
To an extent. It's
I don't.
maybe not an answer yet. I don't know if you.
I don't. I'm not consciously thinking like that, I suppose. I mean, there's artists I definitely have an affinity with, obviously, hugely, but it includes like Piero della Francesca, or a lot of Renaissance with perspective stuff, and or Japanese image making where things float in a kind of impossible gravity, the landscape paintings. I basically got taught art history by a man called John Stezuker, who doesn't believe in linear historical teaching, so I really enjoyed that, and I'm afraid I don't, probably just stuff sticks, and I'm not that critical. I just relate to what I do relate to, and the rest of it I completely respect, and there's a space for it, but I don't spend much time thinking about it. But probably if I have an analytical dialogue with anything in history, it's more about situationists or voodoo or surrealism or I haven't got a very good fact brain in a way. Like I don't know some of what I don't really know what some of what you're talking about, even, which is fine. But I'm just telling you, so I don't know how to respond. Like I can't remember what Brownian motion is.
It's just, well, I'm not like an expert by any means, but it's just about particles.
Oh yeah.
Movement of particles being a random motion, and that feedback loop that cybernetics requires this indeterminate data to feed into, which could be seen as kind of beginnings of AI.
Yeah. Thank you.
Lots of the Dada artists were interested in that, and of course lots of net artists. Some of your contemporaries are often, they're all often talked about in this maybe kind of problematically kind of historical lineage with Dada. So you don't necessarily read art history in a linear format anyhow.
Am I answering anything of what you're asking?
No, you don't have to say. But no, that it's interesting about the Renaissance references as well.
Well, Leonard Tarkovsky is massive. Like, there's all sorts of stuff, but it's very magpied. And in terms of science and mathematics, I'll get my head around something and then it'll kind of fade away.
There's many things in there, of course, that you just try to point out a few of them that I guess are linked, and all of them have to do with time and our encounters with time on the one hand and politics on the other. Me speaking about a capacity of transtemporality, reaching hands both to the deep past and deep future. It seems to be this kind of capacity a little bit with lots of possibilities, egalitarian potentials. I mean, it's great, but on the other hand, for example, I mean, forgetting about what's happening right now, I remember that Ernst Bloch wrote about how Hitler and the Nazis deployed kind of a mode of asynchrony in order to recruit Germans who felt alienated in face of a new modernity. And then we can think about a term like neo-Nazi. Then what does that mean? This kind of maybe a retrofuturist kind of summoning of something in the past. So there is a chronopolitics going on, and it's important how we position ourselves towards a capacity of transtemporality. But again, I'm not sure if we could actually have agency over this. Once we kind of open up the pot of time, it just pops out without us, getting to choose whether we need this part of it or that, or how can we then engineer the future? That comes to be the question. But then, I mean, speaking of this transtemporality, in the age of AI and machine learning, again, seems to be a crucial question that we have to face. Again, is about eventuality and kind of a teleology, because this machine that eventually, as we say, is going to be an indifferent other, which is at least as capable and as agentic as the human being is. This is a very typical cliche dystopian science fiction scenario, but actually can easily outgrow the human. Or what is the interaction then? Because we seem to be quite on the edge of realizing all these century-old dystopian ideas about the indifferent other. And it seems to confront us back again with the idea of teleology and eventuality, something quite linear, something with a distinct future, which is retroactively maybe impacting us in the present. But then, a third and final point about two things in the actual works that you show. One about that Black Water movie. I think there were some audio pieces from Fatima Kadiri's Asia Dish. That's interesting because in that album she also speaks about the idea of an imaginary China, which has nothing to do with the actual China, but is all about the imaginary circulating in popular culture and
Western
popular culture. And then I was thinking about meme magic and Pip and how that actually got displaced out of like a banal comic strip and got recuperated by white supremacists and happened to be a symbol of something that originally had nothing to do with it. And you were also speaking about how kind of materials coming from different contexts, both temporal and spatial, being loaded with the capacity of summoning something different from where they eventually land. And I was thinking of the internet as a context because there were lots of collages in there. And I couldn't locate fully where each piece of that collage, that cut up, was coming from. But then you speaking about the neural networks, I was like, okay, the context is the internet, nothing more specific than that. But then, what does it mean to think of the internet as a point of origin, as a context from which things come and to which things go back to?
You mean that? Oh, have you finished? Not.
Sorry.
No,
just two
go.
minutes. Yes, I.
Yeah. Okay. You meaning The collage pieces are in and out of the internet because they're mostly actually cut things, collected cut paper. So there's a not only obviously but I don't know where to start. There's a whole, I probably think the way we're going, the dystopian version is absolutely spot on, but I suppose my cry is to, along with loads of other thinkers and artists, and musicians, is to just open to non-linearity more and try and be prepared in some way to, not just coders, not just Lendel's friend Mike, who's got the tools, but I don't know what the future is, but it's definitely not going to be great being full of prejudice and fear and linearity in any way. So that's one moment of what you were talking about. But I don't want, I think I've really sat in the dystopia zone for a long time, and I feel like now it's all actually here and happening, that I've been asking myself this year, what affective stuff can actually be done. And after Mark's death, just picking up from that. So nothing's fixed in anything. That's not an apology, it's just a fact. That's in this moment. And that's Internet of Things, that swirl of stuff that's constantly around us is one of the images I really loved quite a long time ago is the moment in William Gibson's Neuromancer where there's all that flailing, endless stuff that the machine's picking things out of and just making moments of connection and off they go again. I really liked that. I suppose the way we work in video has that influence.
Just a question for clarification. I thought that you were saying about anti-Anthropocene that it is that matter retracts from human interests. Did I catch that part right? Because it seems a curious inverse of what.
That's a Donna Haraway moment.
Yeah, it was a lot of Donna Haraway moments.
Well, that was one of the big ones.
Yeah, because it seems such a curious inverse of the Anthropocene, or if you want to read it as the Capitalocene, or even extending to the Plantationocene, which seems like the influence of the consequence and spillover of linear thinking on matter all around. So it is actually not interested in all that stuff that happens that is counter the interests, which is why it's happening, because it's the uncontrollable of the linearity, right? So I was a bit curious, like, where does that come from? Did I misunderstand?
I don't
Am I
know.
too analytic?
I can't find it. I can't see. Maybe I just read it out wrong. Like, I'm not quite sure. Is it an exact sentence?
It is how my memory accepts it. So I'm not sure what that then means. Because it is interesting, because then you show us this fine frolicking bears, which I like, of course, and the humans with the bear masks, and then they dress like the opposite gender, whatever that means. And then I'm curiously seeing if that is in one way connected or not. If you bring this matter escaping, your anti-Anthropocene thinking, this matter escaping interests somehow, in a way, brings that back to this pristine woods with happy electronic beers that you show as
Oh,
a
I
form
don't, they're not meant
of
to be
opposite
so
gendering.
happy. Well, that's your excellent subjective response. I mean, I'm not sure where the happy bit is, but
I just saw a very, well, compared to the dystopian stuff that I have on a daily basis, this
Oh,
is
yeah.
for me by now happy.
yeah, no.
Yeah, I'm distorted.
Yeah, well, fair enough. That's definitely something. I mean, that's something I was trying to talk about a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
That how to get things harder without being really definitive, because I don't like being definitive.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like fixed thinking generally. So would you go for bewildered bears?
I would love it. Yes, but then also can't be an opposite gender anymore, right? That also indeterminate is away, because that is already quite fixed then, no?
Yeah, no, but that was a that's the I Ching reading, and it's quite hard translating something that wasn't worrying about gender politics from thousands of years ago into, particularly because the show was in Germany, where there's a lot of, and it was not in a big multi-racial city, it was in quite a small place in the Black Forest. So we didn't want to, like, I can't remember what the I Ching actual reading said, but it wasn't great in terms of other gender. So we tried to neutralise it, but you've spotted that one.
I've got another question here, so I'm mindful of the time, so
Well,
Julie.
I kind of thought it said, or maybe I also am kind of overlaying or something, but I thought it said that humans were the opposite gender, so I thought it was rather making like a comment upon like what's regarded human, what's regarded non-human, rather than, but that's just anyway, side point.
I thought that this is how I read it on the slide, no? It's on the lake with fire as opposite slide, and then we have there the bear masks, humans in the bear masks. Also wear bear masks and dress as other gender.
Yeah.
This is where I picked it up from.
Sorry, I genuinely have to.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks so much for that. I kept thinking about you talking about sourcing, and then I was sourcing the human, the unhuman, and then I kept thinking about like the practice of sampling, or like extending the practice of sampling within sound to something that is not necessarily regarded as sonic. So like sampling a ritual rather than sourcing it as something, or like sampling the unrecorded, or like making something sonic. Here's a side point, but I guess I was wondering if you could talk a bit about the use of sound in the Black Waters work.
I cut it off before the whole list of who's involved. So what are you?
Just wondering
How
how did you create the
sampling?
soundtrack, or like what the thinking behind the sound for the, or it's like how do you sound Metallic Ocean or something? You know,
Yeah,
staying with
exactly.
like staying with the Zine Ocean from 2 weeks ago.
Well, this one, that yeah, Black Waters, I realised I wanted sound that was much more delicate than the piece before, that Shadow Operators one, where it was this sledgehammer surging you know, like that one Otrix point never track that's got about 20 layers at the end that just complete surge, and then I mix that with another piece that's also got loads of layers. It's just this huge sound, which you can't really escape. So that one was trying to flatten people, I suppose, because that was quite politically angry, with lots of text on it. And then this one felt more like the video needed space, so I was looking for work that was a bit less large. And a friend who I work with quite often in Cape Town makes a lot of interesting sound that's very scratchy and tiny, and then so I started with his work that kind of set the space as being more delicate, and then just put stuff in. It's all credited. I just can't get this to, I can't find my cursor.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to ask you how you go about writing the script, if you like, for this talk, because it has for me it has a sort of poetic, quite a flow. But I like the way you did it, and I just wondered how you go about deciding what to say. Is it a very instinctive thing, or is it very structured?
It starts maybe with looking back through notebooks or remembering things I want to look for. The idea of it being about, you know, ritual and liquidity and machine vision, I suppose, were quite clear for some reason to start with. And then I think I had about 70 pages of notes on the computer that went in and out of, you know, fact and poetry and observation, and little bits of old Orphan Drift work as well. And I just started putting things together. You know how you can do with a machine, you can just move them around and then they sit, and that's okay, or they're not needed. So I suppose it's quite intuitive in a way, but it's quite clear in the agenda, what the intention I want to get across, I think.
Thanks a lot. I really enjoyed that and was really quite drawn to the stuff you're saying about the potential for building narratives that are kind of speculative and allow for this fluidity as a way of maybe countering the divide between like an animist or mystic way of interpreting the world and the kind of hard science of post-Enlightenment thinking. And then it's really interesting that you then at the end sort of turn towards machinic vision and a deep dream in particular as a way of maybe working through this. And my understanding of the kind of quest of the people who are building these AIs and these neural networks is to make a big enough data set, you know, collect all the data that they can, and when there's finally enough quantification, then these systems can kind of make an intelligence that we can use, or that is like possible for us. But that seems built on this kind of like hard, rigid science logic that reduces being in the world to kind of data points that this thing can understand. But then kind of countering that, the way you talked about collage and the potential for finding these kind of tangled narratives in bringing together the right sources or the right things, or the things that speak to you. And I just wondered, like, with the idea of AI and these things being built on a data set, do you think it's a question, like, is it a question of the right data set with the right material can break through the rigid structures that the AI is built on, or that like that logic is built on? Like, can it escape itself by being fed the right stuff? I guess is the question.
Yeah, that's the question. But I think I mean, I can only imagine that the idea of controlling it in the end is completely delusional. And I was very interested when the first stuff about singularity definitely happening was around last year, and Stephen Hawking was just going, no, this is like, don't do it, it's the end of humanity. So that cheered me up. And I suppose I'm trying to learn about what the coding implies. Not that I can ever want to be a coder, but I want to understand what is going on. And the fact that the black box algorithms, as I understand it, there's a whole, Chinese box level where we do not know what processes are going on. And at the moment, yes, what comes out, I was highly disappointed by what the first stuff we got back. It was brilliant because it worked on the birds that were in the picture, not that picture. But then I'm like, oh, why have we got the chameleon chicken everywhere? I thought other stuff would happen. And then I realised that what I'd looked at in researching was loads of different images of different data sets being fed different algorithms. So I'd thought it throws out all sorts of stuff, not that you feed it a data set and you get this exact searching for image exactly the same. But I think that if you fed it more collage, non-linear stuff, you would get... I have no idea, actually. But I think it could get really interesting and actually mirror back to us the complexity that we are unable to think that's becoming. I don't know.